In a very short span of time recently, across multiple sections of the front line, a new pattern of attack began to emerge with a level of intensity that is now raising serious questions about the effectiveness of Russian infantry defenses. There was no prolonged artillery barrage to signal the start, and no clear signs of a large-scale assault in the traditional sense. But within moments, several Russian infantry positions were struck in almost the same way. Inside trenches and dugouts, places once considered deep enough to avoid shelling and protected enough to reduce risk, sudden explosions began to hit directly within the hidden space. There was no sense of a familiar type of fire, yet the outcome looked as if a defensive line had been broken from within. When this pattern does not remain isolated to a single point but begins to appear across multiple battlefields, the question is no longer which unit has just taken losses. So why are positions once considered secure still being penetrated in this way? And what has allowed units like Azov to use FPV drones to strike directly into trenches, dugouts, and Russian infantry groups across several sectors at the same time? Stay with Military Force as we break it down. Azov is using FPV drones against Russian infantry across several frontline sectors at the same time, and that pattern points to a structured combat method rather than a string of random attacks. What makes this important is not only the number of strikes, but the way they are distributed. When the same type of pressure appears across different areas, it suggests planning, repetition, and a growing ability to apply one tactical model under different battlefield conditions. That matters in Ukraine because local combat often depends on which side can disrupt the enemy first and keep that disruption alive before larger forces become involved. The choice of targets also shows how this model works. These drones are not focused only on troops moving in the open. They are being sent into trenches, dugouts, and other covered positions where infantry normally expect to survive the first stage of contact. In earlier forms of combat, such places were meant to reduce losses from artillery fragments, machine gun fire, and indirect attack. FPV drones change that calculation because they can be guided directly into the exact space where soldiers are hiding. That turns a defensive position into a vulnerable point the moment it is found, and it gives Ukrainian units a way to challenge the enemy before a wider exchange of fire fully develops under pressure. Azov stands out in this environment because it has become one of the clearest examples of a Ukrainian unit adapting quickly to drone-centered warfare. Its battlefield footage has repeatedly shown that FPV operations are no longer treated as a secondary tool used after the main clash begins. They are becoming part of the opening pressure itself. A small team operating from behind the line can begin shaping the fight early, forcing Russian infantry to react before artillery, armor, or assault groups enter the most dangerous phase of contact. That early pressure can weaken confidence, expose movement, and create small openings for follow-on action in real time. The wider meaning of this shift is hard to miss. FPV drones are no longer sitting at the edge of combat as observers or occasional strike assets. They are moving into the first layer of engagement and influencing how a defensive line experiences the opening minutes of battle. For infantry, that changes the meaning of cover. A trench is no longer only a place to wait out incoming fire. It can become the point where precision attack begins. And once that pressure appears across several sectors at once, the next question is no longer only where these drones hit, but how separate strikes are being linked together into a larger wave of battlefield pressure and disruption. The strength of this FPV model lies in density and timing, because several strikes arriving in quick sequence can produce battlefield pressure far greater than the size of each drone. Instead of depending on one dramatic blast, the attacking side builds force through repeated detonations in the same area, sometimes seconds apart, so the target never receives a moment to recover. That sequence matters because soldiers under attack must react before they understand the pattern. The first explosion may seem isolated. The second suggests the position has already been found. By the third or fourth strike, the main danger is no longer only injury, but the collapse of confidence inside the trench itself. This is why several FPV drones appearing one after another can be more disruptive than a single larger hit. A unit may survive one strike and still hold its place. It is harder to remain organized when danger returns from above, with no predictable pause. Once that rhythm is established, even a defended area begins to feel open. Russian infantry in such a situation face a harsh choice. If they remain inside the trench, they risk another hit. If they move out, they become easier to see and strike during movement. That forced movement is one of the most important results of dense FPV coordination. The drones do not need to kill every soldier in the opening minute. They only need to make the position unstable enough that men start leaving cover at the wrong time and without a plan. From that moment, exposure rises quickly. The position still exists on the ground, but it no longer functions with the same protective value. What matters is not only where soldiers stand, but whether they can stay there without being pushed into panic by the next threat. Another important point is that this model can create a local effect once associated with artillery, yet it does so through smaller and cheaper systems. Artillery suppresses a position through volume. FPV drones suppress it through precision, repetition, and pressure. The result can look similar at close range. The soldiers inside lose composure, movement becomes fragmented, and the position stops acting like a coherent defensive node. That does not mean drones replace artillery in every role. What it means is that, against infantry positions in narrow frontline fights, they can produce some of the same tactical outcomes through a different method. That method depends more on coordination than raw explosive power. Each strike matters because it is linked to the next one. A single detonation may wound or frighten. A chain of detonations can break the tempo by which a unit observes, reports, and reacts. Once that tempo is broken, even limited losses can create outsized battlefield effects. Men scatter. Lines of sight are lost. Orders arrive late or do not arrive at all. A squad that was defending one space turns into separated individuals trying to survive separate moments. That is the deeper value of well-coordinated FPV pressure. It attacks not only bodies and positions, but also the internal rhythm that allows a defensive line to stay stable under stress. When that pressure continues, the enemy is denied the quiet interval needed to restore order. There is no reliable pause to count losses, reassign sectors, or prepare a measured response. Every second begins to belong to anticipation rather than control. That is why a wave of small drone strikes can feel much larger than the size of the systems involved. Its force comes from compression. Time is compressed. Reaction space is compressed. The gap between one threat and the next is compressed until the unit under attack begins to function in fragments rather than as a whole. But this kind of dense coordination would not be so effective if trenches and dugouts still offered the protection infantry once expected from them. Trenches and dugouts are no longer giving Russian infantry the level of safety they once promised. And that change may be one of the clearest signs that frontline warfare is being rewritten by FPV drones. For decades, field fortifications followed a simple logic. The deeper the trench and the stronger the overhead cover, the better the chance of surviving artillery, fragments, machine gun fire, and the dangers of open ground. That logic still matters against many traditional threats. Soldiers still need earthworks because the front remains full of shelling, shrapnel, and long hours under observation. But it becomes far weaker against a weapon that can see a position, approach from above, and strike inside the space meant to protect the men below. This is why many defensive positions now look less like shelters and more like targets with visible entry points. What makes FPV drones especially dangerous in this setting is their ability to exploit the geometry of a trench or dugout. A trench is built to reduce exposure to horizontal fire. A dugout is meant to limit the effect of blast and fragments coming from outside. Neither was designed for a small guided device that can drop from above, turn sharply, and enter through an opening or exposed section. A narrow trench line can become a channel that guides danger inward rather than keeping danger out. The defensive structure may still exist on the map, but the confidence once attached to it begins to weaken. A soldier may be hidden from rifles and indirect fire, yet still remain vulnerable to a system that uses vision, speed, and precision rather than simple volume. In that sense, shape itself becomes a weakness once the enemy controls the angle of approach. The damage is not only physical. A trench is also a psychological promise. It tells infantry that if they stay low, stay disciplined, and use the ground well, they can improve their chances of survival long enough to hold position. FPV drones weaken that promise. Once soldiers believe a covered position can still be entered or hit with precision, the sense of protection begins to erode. That matters because infantry performs better when it trusts the cover around it. Fear grows faster when the threat feels sudden and personal. Another major change is the speed between detection and attack. In earlier conditions, being found did not always mean being hit at once. There could still be time to move, reinforce, or endure the danger. With FPV drones, that interval can shrink to only moments. That shorter gap leaves less room for calm judgment and far less room for frontline discipline. This does not mean trenches and dugouts have become useless. Infantry still needs protection from artillery, weather, sniper fire, and exposure across the line. Units still dig because open ground remains deadly, and any force without field cover would suffer even faster losses. But their value is no longer absolute. They reduce some dangers while doing far less against others. That is the deeper shift taking place. Protection has become conditional. Safety now depends not only on earth, timber, or concrete, but also on whether the position has been detected, whether the approach is exposed, and whether hostile drones are active overhead. In that environment, hiding well no longer guarantees survival in the way it once did. And once a defensive position stops guaranteeing safety, the next consequence is not only casualties, but a rapid breakdown in how a unit keeps communication, formation, and control under pressure. The most immediate effect of an FPV strike is often measured in casualties, but the deeper effect is the disorder that spreads through a unit after the blast. Once Russian positions come under this kind of attack, the problem is no longer limited to the men hit first. It quickly becomes organizational. A position that looked stable moments earlier can begin to lose its internal structure, as small groups stop functioning as parts of one defensive system and start reacting as isolated survivors inside the same danger zone. That change matters because a frontline position survives not only through cover and firepower, but through coordination. Soldiers need to know who is still in place, which direction remains threatened, and who is responsible for the next action. FPV pressure makes all of that harder. Shock, dust, noise, and sudden movement blur the local picture at the exact moment when clarity matters most. Even before the next drone appears, the first strike may already have damaged the unit's ability to think and act as one body. Communication is one of the first things to suffer. Even when radios still work, the information passing through them becomes less reliable. Reports arrive late. Details are confused. Commanders may receive fragments instead of a full picture, and fragmented information leads to fragmented decisions. At that point, the unit is no longer responding as one organized element. It is responding in pieces. This helps explain why disruption can spread faster than the physical blast radius itself. Men who survive the first strike often have to decide before they know whether another drone is already approaching. Some stay where they are. Others shift deeper into cover. Others try to move away from the point that was hit. Each reaction may seem reasonable at the individual level, but the combined result is confusion. Lines of sight are lost. Sectors are left thin or uncovered. A trench once defended as one connected position starts breaking into separated pockets of fear and guesswork. That short delay can be decisive. A unit may still be physically present, yet no longer functioning with the discipline needed to hold ground effectively. This is also why forced movement after a strike often makes the situation worse. Survivors frequently change position quickly to avoid a second hit, but hurried movement inside or around a trench creates new problems. It interrupts observation. It clogs narrow routes. It exposes men who might otherwise have remained concealed. Most importantly, it weakens any chance of an immediate and orderly counter-response. That temporary loss of order also creates openings for the attacker, because every delayed report, every uncovered angle, and every confused movement increases the chance that the next drone will strike a position that is weakened, exposed, and off balance. In this kind of combat, even a few lost minutes can carry major weight at the local level. If the first strike is followed by another before order is restored, defenders may lose control of the position without a major assault ever taking place. That is where FPV begins to show value beyond an ordinary attack weapon, because it allows a small force to create tactical effects far larger than its real size on the battlefield. One of the most important changes in this war is that a very small drone team can now generate effects that once required larger formations and much heavier firepower. A few operators positioned behind the line can guide FPV drones into a trench, an infantry cluster, or an assault group without sending their own soldiers into direct enemy fire. That changes the battlefield equation in a serious way. It allows Ukraine to inflict damage at the front while reducing the immediate risk to its own manpower, which is especially important in sectors where Russian artillery, mortars, and small arms fire still make direct movement extremely costly. In practical terms, this means a small team with screens, batteries, and prepared drones can threaten positions that once demanded heavier support weapons or a far riskier infantry approach. That is why FPV has become what many now see as a battlefield equalizer. The effect is not magical, and it does not erase every Russian advantage. What it does is narrow the gap. It gives a force with fewer resources a way to strike accurately, quickly, and repeatedly at exposed moments in the enemy's local combat rhythm. That matters because frontline success is not always decided by who owns the most powerful systems on paper. It is often shaped by who can identify a target first, track it in real time, and deliver a precise hit before the other side can adapt. Small FPV teams fit that requirement remarkably well. They can attack infantry positions, disrupt movement, and pressure assault elements at a fraction of the cost associated with traditional heavy fire support. This cost difference is a major part of the story. A relatively cheap drone can damage a fortified position, force trained troops to scatter, or slow a local push before it gains momentum. In a long war of attrition, that exchange matters more than a single dramatic strike. The side that can create repeated pressure at lower cost gains an important advantage over time, especially when every shell, vehicle, and trained soldier carries strategic value. This also explains why the advantage is no longer held entirely by the side with heavier firepower. Heavy systems still matter. Artillery still matters. Armor still matters. But local battlefield pressure now depends more than before on speed of detection, speed of decision, and speed of accurate attack. FPV drones reward the side that can connect those steps faster. That is why they do more than simply destroy targets. They reshape the balance between cost and effect, between exposure and reach, and between mass and precision at the tactical level. For Ukraine, that creates a tool that can hit hard without demanding the same level of direct physical exposure from its own troops. And that is why the value of FPV goes beyond balancing combat power, because it is also beginning to reshape how pressure is created and managed on the battlefield itself. Azov stands out not only because it uses FPV drones effectively, but because it has become an example of how this form of warfare is changing the front line itself. Its battlefield footage does more than document destruction. It shows a transition in modern combat, where small units using adapted civilian technology can produce tactical effects once linked to far more expensive and complex systems. That matters because it reveals a shift in battlefield power. A force does not always need a large concentration of heavy weapons to influence a fight. In some cases, a smaller team with drones, skilled operators, and good timing can steadily shape how a sector functions over time. This is one reason FPV warfare has become so important. Its value is not limited to one dramatic strike or one destroyed position. It lies in repeated pressure. That pressure can wear down Russian infantry gradually, making it harder for them to hold ground with confidence and consistency. The goal is not always immediate breakthrough. Often the goal is erosion. If soldiers are forced to live under constant threat, their ability to endure, observe, and react begins to weaken even before a larger assault appears. This is where the psychological effect becomes especially important. The sound of a drone overhead, the uncertainty about where it may come from, and the fear that movement itself may trigger a strike can change behavior across a position. Troops begin to hesitate. They avoid leaving cover. They delay movement between points. They reduce visible activity even when action is needed. Over time, that creates a quieter but more fragile defense. The unit may still occupy the ground, yet its freedom to act has narrowed. That is why FPV drones are not only destroying men and positions, they are shaping tempo, behavior, and mental pressure at the same time. A weapon with that kind of effect does more than add another threat to the battlefield. It changes how soldiers live inside the battlefield from hour to hour. And when a system can weaken fortifications, disrupt the life of a position, and steadily wear down the confidence of the men inside it, the result is larger than a series of isolated attacks. It points to a deeper change in the logic of survival for frontline infantry in modern war. What is changing on this battlefield is not only the weapon, but the meaning of protection itself. Trenches, dugouts, and hidden positions still matter, yet they no longer offer the same confidence they once did when small drones can search, approach, and strike with such speed. That shift is forcing infantry to live under a new kind of pressure, where danger is not always loud at first, but constant, precise, and difficult to predict. The side that adapts faster to this reality gains more than a tactical advantage. It gains influence over tempo, movement, and the mental balance of the fight. This is why FPV warfare now matters far beyond individual explosions or isolated losses. It is changing how positions are held, how soldiers react, and how long a line can remain stable under stress. Trench warfare has not disappeared, but it is being reshaped by a sky that no longer lets the ground feel safe. Subscribe to Military Force to stay informed on how modern warfare is evolving and what it means for global stability. Each video breaks down real battlefield developments with clear analysis, helping you understand both the tactics and the deeper consequences of conflict. Because understanding war is not about glorifying it, but about recognizing its cost and why the pursuit of peace remains essential.